I got no. Oh, there I am. I hear me now. I hear me now.
Far. Can you hear him? He's approaching. And what say you? Is that you? Hello there! The fog separates and he appears from the shadows. He transforms before our very eyes and walks upon the earth. He is the Crow.
You know, I don't think I'm ever going to get over exactly how... Thank you for somebody else hitting the fader on that. I don't think I'll ever get over how completely overly dramatic that intro is. Not that I'm complaining. It's kind of a good time. Say, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Eat Crow, where, as I like to say, it's not a suggestion, it's a commandment. So there you have it. This week, I am absolutely honored and pleased beyond belief to enter into the studio. A friend of mine, he's a comedian, he's a poet, he's a writer, he submits to Huffington Post, has put out several comedy CDs, has written books, put out one-man shows, has one coming up that we will be discussing in just a little bit. A purveyor of fine words and phrases. Please welcome Mr. Dylan Brody.
I will be playing the part of Dylan Brody for the remainder of the show.
It's not typecasting either. I think the audition process was probably intensive, right?
There was a certain point during the audition process at which I genuinely believed I was not going to get the role. It seemed as though Prevens might get to play me.
Right.
And then, in the end, what happened is that I pulled out little bits of historical facts about myself that convinced the casting directors and the board of producers. It was a table full of people passing judgment on me. So it really just felt like dinner with my family.
Right. Is he really you? Are you really you? Or are you just somebody trying to be you?
It's an authenticity issue when you come down to it, and I do not have papers.
Well, welcome. So like many 12-year-olds in the country currently.
I haven't checked.
So,
yes, sir.
Thank you. Your success record and your history is rather illustrious. And in the few times that I've had the opportunity to see you perform and tell stories and speak and do stand-up, I'm always the title that you've given yourself, purveyor of fine words and phrases, I think is so unbelievably appropriate. How did this come to be? Because the simple fact is, I would say, is that there are so few purveyors of such things, and yet you kind of really have that nailed. How did you get to that? Where does that come from?
First of all, that is possibly the best question I've heard about my career yet in an interview.
And that's the opener. Awesome.
Well done. For years, when I was a comic, part of what I was doing on the road, I was young and I was a stoner and I was a political comic, and part of what I was doing was dumbing down myself in an attempt to reach the widest possible audience. And I was a very left-leaning comic in a time when it was a very right-leaning country. So I knew I needed to be very funny to get the gigs, just to be working.
Sure.
But at the same time, I wanted to be accessible. So I did small things. I dropped the G's from my ing words. I cursed a lot on stage. I tried to seem as blue-collar and sort of undereducated as I could to make what I was doing accessible to a working-class, anti-intellectual, left-leaning audience. And then I could take them by surprise with these jokes that I was doing. When I quit smoking pot and came in off the road for a while, I didn't know I was going to reinvent as a storyteller. But I knew that I was enraged by the dumbing down of America.
And for good reason.
I knew that it didn't really crystallize for me until I saw Forrest Gump. And the vast success and the outpouring of adulation over this film that I found to be absolutely reprehensible.
Finally, somebody else.
This is a film, the underlying message of which, and make no mistake, every film, every TV show has an underlying message. Whether they acknowledge it or not, it is the nature of art. And they'll say, oh, but it's just entertainment, which is the word people use when they don't want to take responsibility for what they're saying through their art. But Forrest Gump was a movie, the underlying message of which was, our country can have a proud and noble history if we can just learn to see it through the eyes of a complete moron. If you take up a position of leadership and authority, you will have your legs blown off. If you go out and you explore your world and you experiment with the possibilities, you will get AIDS and die. It's a box of chocolates. Take what you get.
Exactly.
And that, I watched it and I sat there going, how can everybody in the country be saying this is genius, this is brilliant, just because Tom Hanks does a really good job of playing a retarded guy? That's not enough to make it great art in my mind. And it started to occur to me at that point that I did not want to be part of the stupidifying of a nation that could theoretically be a great place. So at that point, I was pulling back from stand-up. I didn't know who I was. I wasn't smoking pot. For years, I said on stage, I didn't realize how true it was. I used to say on stage, I smoke pot because I'm way too smart without it. I quit doing pot for 2-3 weeks. I'm doing the New York Times crossword puzzle in pen every day. Got to get it done. Got to smoke a joint. I'm like a normal person struggling over the junior jumble. And I didn't realize that I actually was smoking pot to bring me down. But everyone I was hanging out with was also smoking pot, so I was really just degrading on a curve. But I didn't know who I could be on stage without the pot, without the mannerisms, without the affectation of rage when actually what I was expressing was outrage. I had a bunch of stuff that was going away about me as a person, and I didn't want to be going on stage doing something that was inauthentic. As I began to write stories first for a radio station in San Francisco, and then for recordings because people started wanting to hear those on CDs, and then began to take them out into the world, I knew that if I branded, and I hate to use that term because it sounds so commercial.
Sounds marketing, but there's a truth to it.
But if I went out and said, I'm a comic, in the modern humorscape, comics are expected to do a joke every 15 seconds. There's a particular rhythm that is expected. And if you go out to a comedy club saying I'm a comic and then you don't provide that product, they won't have you back. You can't come. You're not allowed to do this other thing and call it comedy. There was no way that television would put me on as a comic who doesn't get a laugh every 15 seconds. The laugh per minute ratio is discussed in late night television. So I had to find a different way of presenting what I was doing so that people could see me and enjoy my work and not be disappointed. And once I started saying I'm a purveyor of fine words and phrases, I'm a humorist, I'm a storyteller, and I wrote jokes for what's the difference between a comic and a humorist, mostly my cufflinks. There was all that kind of stuff that I had to do for the radio interviews. But really what would happen is the expectation would shift. And as the expectation shifted, I became more and more freed to fully express myself as the person I was.
Right.
So over time, I began to allow myself more complex metaphors, more poetic sentences, more lovely use of language that fits with the purveyor of fine words and phrases brand, and know that an audience listening to me doesn't require a laugh from me every 15 seconds, as long as what I'm giving them is high quality spoken literature every moment.
Perfect. That's awesome.
So that's really what I try to do. I try to maintain a certain standard of honesty in terms of the stories I tell, which doesn't mean they're always factual, but there's always a truth that I'm trying to reveal about myself or my perception of the world in what I write. I try to make sure that I am not saying anything that I do not disagree with, which is to say, the underlying message of what I do, I recognize so that I can feel comfortable calling what I do art. And I don't have to minimize it or distance myself from it by saying, I was only joking. Hey, it's only entertainment. You don't have to take it. No, I am making art, and not everybody is going to like it, and not everybody is going to agree with me. But at night, I can sleep.
Right.
I don't lie in hotel rooms all over the country, hugging to my chest the knowledge that I once had greatness in me and have sold a lot of drinks for a nightclub tonight. You know, I am able to say, oh, I put together a good story today. Sometimes I wrote a good sentence today. Sometimes I wrote 5 minutes of great jokes today. But whatever it is, I am writing from myself and for an audience that will appreciate myself, rather than trying to figure out what people want and then writing that in joke form.
I so completely understand. I mean, not only as a comedian, and I decided a while ago, I realized that even when I have what is for me a good show, a good set, it's not necessarily that every joke lands. And I've sort of become comfortable with the, yeah, you know what? It's okay with me if I'm saying something that I feel good about and it doesn't work for that audience. There was a time where I would get very sort of like, it's not working. And you get where it's like, oh, do I need to shift this or that? And then getting comfortable with the idea that, no, actually, if this is what I'm thinking and feeling, and this is what I want to talk about tonight, I'm just going to go do it and rest on that as being, that is the foundation of my expression. Same thing with music. I mean, there was a point, I remember I was in a band. We'd done a CD that nobody heard, working with like
Does your audience know that you are a master of the vibes? You play the vibes?
I do play and the pan flute.
The pan flute
on the
and
occasion.
the vibes, yeah.
They know it now. But no, we'd our producer had been a guy by the name of Bobby Hart, and Bobby Hart, part of Hart Boyce, he wrote, Hurts So Bad for Linda Ronstadt, wrote a bunch of stuff for the Monkees. And we'd done, and how he ended up producing a metal band, will never figure out. Lovely human being, I mean, really. But there was a point that we sat down about doing the next record, and it was you need to write this kind of music for this demographic kind of thing. And I went, so this is where I quit. So I completely understand where it's like, you have to do anything that is truly artistic, that is truly something that is of yourself and of your soul, you actually have to come from that place. Anything else is bullshit.
Well, yes, I agree that you have to be writing from yourself. On the other hand, sadly, we live in a capitalist society where we don't have patron of the arts as something you can look to.
Right. I don't know. My mom's pretty awesome.
I don't have a lot of TV exposure. I would love more TV exposure. And about a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, whenever it was that Leno said, I'm stepping down, and I'm heading over to...
Wait, which time?
When he was actually going to do it.
Okay.
But yeah, not when he said I'm stepping to an earlier time slot. When he said I'm actually turning over the show. I had written for him years ago, and I was heartbroken. Part of the dropping out of comedy, the year that I dropped out of comedy was the year that Carson retired.
Wow.
Because so much of my life had been devoted to that point to, I want to get on Carson. And I'd written for Leno. Getting on Leno didn't feel like the same thing. Somehow one of my dreams was now not attainable. And it was heartbreaking. And it was part of the shift in my psyche at the time. And when Leno said he was stepping down, I suddenly realized that I wanted The Tonight Show. It wasn't just Carson, and it doesn't matter that I didn't love the show with Leno the way I loved it with Carson. I wanted The Tonight Show, and it was going to move to New York, and maybe I should put some effort into getting it before it went away. And I failed. Doesn't matter. The point is, I called in, I said, hey, guys, because I know people, that I can get people on the phone. I said, I'd like to do the show. Can I send you some stories? And they said, we require a 4-to-1 LPM. That's the laugh per minute ratio. Yeah. And for about an hour, I wandered around my home going, those assholes, they don't understand art. I don't work that way. And then I thought, wait a minute. I want the Tonight Show. I don't want the Tonight Show to live in the universe I imagine it should live in my head. I want me to be on the Tonight Show.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a piece. Well, I took a piece of mine that I knew was funny enough, trimmed it down, peeled out all of the fat from it, got it down to 6 minutes with a 4-to-1 laugh per minute ratio, went out to open mics for the first time in years, just called people I knew and said, hey, I got to get something on tape. Can I? Went out, worked this piece until I knew I had it down, recorded it in a decent venue, and sent it in. And it didn't hurt me. It wasn't, I didn't have to change what I do. I didn't have to make it stupider. I didn't have to take out any of the good lines that I loved. I just had to make sure that it was funny in a row within the specific time limitations and the specific time to laugh limitations that they said they wanted. And it was really an object lesson for me late in life. And by late in life, I mean, ideally midway through my life or so.
Or just 5 p.m.
Right. Yeah. Whenever it happened, I bench press 350, 355, 4 o'clock, whenever the machine's free. Because as a youth, my response was always, they don't want the thing I just put on the table. Screw them. They don't understand me. And frequently they're saying, yeah, we don't like this thing on the table. Here's what you need to give us if you want to play in our sandbox. And it's their sandbox. They get to say that. So, yeah, there are some sandboxes that I wouldn't play in. I understand saying, you want me to write for that demographic, that's not what I do. Mm-hmm. But there's also a point where you can kind of go, oh, this is a really good producer. I like working with him. What if I show him that I can create something on demand for a specific group, maintain my integrity, do what I do, say what I want to say, but within his parameters, and then be able to work with him again next week on something else, and then a year from now say to him, this is the next project I want to work on, this is how it's going to fit together, help me make that happen. It might then sometimes be worth it to do something that is outside of the comfort zone, as long as you can figure out how to build your authentic voice into that comfort zone.
How to bring it back around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first time Sedaris asked me to open for him, he asked me to do 4 minutes. And I said, sure. And I have a great story that runs 4 minutes. And as I was preparing for that night, and it was a big deal for me, he's one of my heroes, I was going to be in a larger stage than I had ever worked. It's sort of a lie. When I was very young and new in the business, I opened for a musician, and they played some huge stages, but my only job was to talk for half an hour while they set up the sound, and people screamed for the musician to come on stage. But this was the largest crowd I had ever worked that would listen to me. And I was gearing up for it, and I remembered when I was starting out as a comic, when I was 17 and working open mic nights in New York and going to auditions and showcasing for clubs, they would say, you got 6 minutes. And I would think, well, what can you do in 6 minutes? You're just warming up in 6 minutes. You can't have them in 6 minutes. And now, as an adult who knows what I'm doing and knows how it works, I know how to get my first laugh in the first 15 seconds. And I know how to hold their attention for whatever amount of time I'm told to, and how to get the laughs at the places they're coming. And when I did that set, I was so relaxed on stage that I was able to write a new joke into the bit in the moment during a laugh. I heard the laugh. I thought, oh, I got another tag. Threw it in and continued. The next time I opened for him, he's asked me to do 7 minutes for both shows. And it's not for months. And I figured out exactly what piece I want to do for those shows. And I have yet to time it properly and see if it's 7 minutes or if I need to cut, or I definitely don't need to lengthen it. But whether it is the marketplace that you're working to, a time constraint that you're working to, a requirement for television that your language be restricted in certain ways.
What the fuck?
Yeah. You can't do that on television. There's always something going on that affects the output. It's not just output. There's always a restriction or a concession that needs to be made to something.
Some kind of boundary.
And the more boundaries you are able to work with, the easier it becomes the easier it becomes for your audience to find you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't know what your listenership or watchership or viewership is on this show. I know that I'm not for everybody, right?
Sure.
I assume that the people who watch or listen to this show do it because they know your voice, they know your humanity, they know who you are, they know the kinds of people you bring on, and they find that interesting.
I certainly hope so.
Out of those people, maybe 12% will go, this Dylan Brody guy is really cool. I got to see him. I got to get his stuff. I got to listen to his CDs. I got to read his book. I got to whatever they do. I got to stalk him. I got to steal his dog.
And the other 88% need to wake up.
The other 88% may be going, well, I like it better when he has the guy on who says fuck a lot. That's fine.
No, that's me.
I don't need to get everybody. But I can't get my 12% unless everybody sees me.
Right.
And everybody's not going to see me if every time there's some constraint on what I do, I go, no, I'm not going to reach that audience because I'm not allowed to curse on your show. No, I refuse to perform for people under 30. Why, no, everybody must wear a tie when they, I'm not going to play those games. It's sometimes I feel a little bit like I'm selling out depending on the concessions I make. And at the moment that I feel like I'm actually being compromised in my authenticity and honesty, then I say, yeah, that's not the right gig for me.
But up until that point, you're open.
Up until that point, I'm open. And I try to remember when I find myself not being open, to remind myself that that's a knee-jerk reaction and it may not be appropriate here.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that what's being asked of me is just a constraint I hadn't considered before.
So let me ask, the 4 minutes that you worked down to do for the Tonight Show, do you remember that?
I think it was 6 minutes with a 4-to-1 LPM, and yes, I do. It goes something like this.
Go.
I live in Sylmar, California. It's not a crap neighborhood. It is crap neighborhood adjacent. It's at the confluence of the mighty 118 and the majestic 210. I live in a townhouse with my dogs, Sir Corin, the beautiful dog-faced dog, Brindlebeast of Sylmar, and Lord Buckley Sweetlips, greatest of all Dane Much, the dinosaur-slaying dog, and my lovely wife, whose name escapes me at the moment. We walk the dogs beyond the townhouse complex, where we have neighbors who have actual lawns. My dogs have a favorite lawn. I clean up after them because I try to be a good neighbor. My dogs, not the neighbors. That's not that good a neighbor. Recently, Lord Buckley Sweetlips, greatest of all Dane Much, the dinosaur-slaying dog, asked for his afternoon walk early. I put him on his leash. He took me directly to his favorite lawn. Apparently, somebody has purchased the house that lives behind that lawn. He came out and said, "That's my lawn." Now, I do not like the passive-aggressive guess my intent game. Moreover, my dogs have loved that lawn longer than he has lived in that house. So we have, as it were, squatters' rights. Rather than engaging him in a direct argument, I pointed to Lord Buckley and said, "That's my dog." The man repeated, "That's my lawn." I repeated, "That's my dog." The man stepped forward. He got slower and louder and more angry and said, "That's my lawn." I considered reasserting ownership of the dog, but at this point I was afraid he might think there was something genuinely wrong with me. So I decided to take a different tack. And for the record, tack is the correct word. It's an idiomatic sailing term. It refers to setting the sail in such a way as to travel in a direction not directly parallel to the prevailing wind. If you've been saying take a different tact, people like me have been judging you harshly. In any case, I went a different direction with the conversation. I said, "I'm sorry, I don't speak English." He said, "You got to be kidding me." I said, "No, seriously." I don't speak any English at all. He said, but we're speaking English right now. I said, I realize this can be confusing. I've learned several words and phrases phonetically, and I'm told I have a pretty good ear for accents. The result is that I seem to be conversant fluent even, but the fact of the matter is I have no idea what either of us has been saying throughout this entire exchange. While I offered up this diatribe, Lord Buckley Sweetlips, greatest of all Danemachts, the dinosaur-slaying dog, hunched up like a tiny kangaroo and relieved himself on the man's lawn. I collected the excrement in a plastic bag because I try to be a good neighbor. I stepped toward the man and extended it and said, if you want this, I won't have it bronzed. He pointed vaguely off toward his trash cans, and I said, I guess I'll just throw it out in the trash over here then. He raised a finger and shouted triumphantly, as though he had actually won something, I knew you spoke English. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I raised a finger back at him, matched his inflection, his tone, his gesture, and listed English words that should be Yiddish but aren't. Moisten kettle, hassle kitchen, spatula, spatula, spatula. Threw out the excrement and went home. About an hour and a half later, Sir Corin, the beautiful dog-faced dog, Brindlebeast of Silmar, wanted his afternoon walk, took me directly to his favorite lawn. The man saw a different dog on the lawn. Sir Corwin is a particularly striking dog. We believe that his father was a Great Dane and his mother was history's most satisfied pug. The man emerged at a run and then realized I was the same guy and froze in his tracks. I grinned at him like we were old friends and said, that's my dog. He said, there is genuinely something wrong with you, and stormed back inside. So apparently I should have just let him think that to begin with. That's the piece. And it's got plenty of jokes in it. Got plenty of laughs. When I get an audience right from the beginning with it, it builds steadily throughout. They didn't have me on the show, but that's okay. I needed to learn that I could adapt a piece to be ready for that if it came. And there have been several pieces that I've written since that I've written thinking, oh, this is TV ready. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is TV ready. There's a piece called I Like to Support the Arts that's a TV ready short. There are 2 phone conversations with my mom. One of them is the one that Sedaris asked me to do, and one of them I wrote more recently. That as I wrote them, I went, oh, this is funny. This is going to work, no question. And then at the same time, I write the longer, more poignant, weirder pieces that go on the CDs, that go out to XM Sirius. I have a new deal with Rooftop Comedy and Rooftop Media now. I am not certain if I'm right about this. I signed with Rooftop Comedy to do my next audio release. And shortly thereafter, I started talking about whether or not I could also do a spoken word storytelling release with them. And shortly thereafter, I was told they had opened a new wing, a sort of a new branch called Rooftop Media that was going to be doing spoken word stuff that wasn't necessarily funny. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I like to believe they did that because they had signed me. And so they have a deal that's there's a lot of non-disclosure. I don't know what they plan to do with this stuff, but I've got a contract with them to deliver a certain number of humorous and a certain number of not necessarily humorous long-form stories between 4 and 12 minutes each, I think, over the next year. And I've been delivering those, and those are about to find broadcast wherever they've signed to broadcast them.
So how does it feel different to you when you're writing something that is humorous as compared to something that is more long form, not necessarily humorous, weirder pieces? Is there a different headspace that you're in, or is it just somehow this is just what's coming out at this point?
It is more the latter than the former. Mm-hmm. The really short, funny pieces I find lately I've been writing while I drive.
I do that. I write a lot when I drive.
There's something about, first of all, because I'm driving, I can't write them down. So I'm forced to keep going back to the beginning and repeating, what are the beats that got me here? What are the beats that got me here? What are the beats that got, so that I can have it to put on paper when I get where I'm going. So I'm sort of developing them in internal performance. Mm-hmm. I think Uncomprehending, the one I did a minute ago, was written that way, though I'm not sure of that. Both of the ones that are phone calls with my mom, I wrote while I was driving. I Like to Support the Arts, I wrote while I was driving, and then I wrote the introduction to it while I was driving to do it. The first time I was going to do it. And now that's all one piece. Now those don't go separately from each
Right.
other. I don't write comedy for myself at the computer so much. When I'm hired to write comedy for other people, I do it at the computer. I have no difficulty doing it there. But the headspace that allows me to write comedy has to do with I'm on my way to a show. I know what I'm going to do, but there's something in this circumstance or where my head is right now that has me forming the ideas right now into jokes of right now. There's a certain amount of, when I hear pieces of news, I write a joke on it. I read an article, I write 4 jokes on it, and then I decide whether or not I'm going to incorporate that in my act or put it up as tweets or throw it onto Facebook or what have you, or sell it to somebody. That occasionally happens. When I'm writing the stuff that isn't particularly funny, there's almost always at least 1 or 2 solid jokes in it.
Sure.
But when I'm writing the pieces that aren't necessarily funny, I think about the sentences and the paragraphs in the same way that I think about jokes. It's always about what is the impact of this moment? How am I holding the audience with this idea? How am I drawing them forward with this one? Ultimately, jokes aren't that different from poems or a good paragraph, a good sentence. Even when I was doing straight ahead stand-up comedy, the pieces always grew from what do I want to say,
Sure.
not from what would be funny. So that there were a lot of comics that used to have me coach them in how to write. That's not true. There were a lot of comics who used to ask me to write for them. And because I was an idiot, I would say, well, I could write for you forever, but couldn't you just pay me a few days' work to teach you how this is done? And then they would do that, and I would undermine my own market base. But it always started with me convincing them that they needed to throw away the idea of trying to find things that would be funny to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's just the kiss of death at every stage of the game. The audience, the reason comics said, but seriously, folks, for so long, or at least thought they said that. People thought they said that. I know Henny Youngman said it. But,
Sure.
But the reason that became a recognizable catchphrase for comics was that the nature of comedy is that you're taking the audience by surprise with the same trick every 15 or 20 seconds. This time I'm not coming to a joke. Oh, it turned out to be a joke. This time I'm actually saying something about my wife. Oh, it's again about how fat she is. This time you keep drawing them in to follow that linear thought of the setup, and then catching them with that.
The hook. It's
Yeah.
It's the same conceit over and over again.
It's the same trick. Yeah. And part of that trick is the belief that now you're serious. And there's no way they're convinced that you're serious if the premise of the joke is, you know what's funny. So when someone is going in to write from that position, they've already stabbed themselves in the back for the performance.
Mm-hmm.
If my premise is, it's really funny the way, I'm screwed. Now, if I decide that I want, for me, it was political, right? So if I was going out during a time that was very homophobic, Andrew Dice Clay was out on stage blaming gays for AIDS, as was Sam Kinison at that time. Mm-hmm. It was all stereotypes about interior decorating and
Broadway dancers
and Broadway
yeah.
dancers and anal sex
Right.
and promiscuity and AIDS and how they deserve it
because
they,
none of us heterosexuals were doing any of that.
yeah, exactly. Well, I wasn't doing much interior decorating, but still. So I would go on the road, and I wanted to say homophobia is an accepted form of bigotry. In order to do that, I had to be funnier than the people who were getting easy laughs on fag jokes. And I was, and I did the material. So for me, it was always political. It was always, what is the issue that needs to be seen from a different angle? And how will I make that clear? And then it's like writing an essay, only instead of points out of the news, each point you make is a joke. And they need to be clear, and they need to be sharp, and they need to be funny, and they need to be as concise and as hard-hitting as possible, particularly if what you're offering is an unpopular point of view at the time. Now, if you want to do something as simple as, I want to talk about shopping. I want to talk about something everyone experiences every week, right? Every day. If you're going to start from supermarkets are hilarious, again, you're screwed. You know why? Because supermarkets are not hilarious. But if you start from the premise that supermarkets ultimately are the strangest invention in human history, and now you're going to prove it to an audience, and you're going to take a series of observations about the supermarket. It's the only place where you can get both Drano and chicken. I don't know what the jokes would be. I haven't written this piece because
Right.
it's not my act. But if that's the thing you want to present, then you may be getting into the nature of how we collect everything we need into one place and then distribute it in the modern society. Mm-hmm. You may be dealing with the way in which they're advertising to you, even after they've got you there to buy the stuff. It may be about how many options there are for the same grape jelly with different labels.
Coupons being spat at you as you walk down the aisle.
Each of these is fodder for a series of jokes. Mm-hmm. And if you start from supermarkets are the most bizarre place on the planet, and then you prove it with 3 or 5 or 7 jokes, and each one gets a laugh, the audience walks out of the room thinking he was really funny and can never walk through a grocery store again without thinking about it.
Right.
This is why I say it's all art, even if you claim it's just a joke, it's just entertainment. Because the thing you are saying for the first time, if you're expressing new ideas, or reinforcing for the 100th time if you are building off of stereotypes, is having an effect on the audience. It's changing or reinforcing the way they see the world. And you can distance yourself from that all you like. I say there's a responsibility there.
Sure.
I don't know exactly how I got started on this long ramble, but my point is, it's never about the writing for me is whether it is comedy or essay or personal narrative. I'm never starting from what's funny. I'm never starting from how can I make people like me, or what can I say that would be the most endearing about me, or how can I get laid tonight? I'm always
one of my personal favorites.
I'm always starting. I knew a comic who used to write segments of his act designed to get him laid after the show. I'm always starting from, what do I want to say? Mm-hmm. What is the idea that I want to express? And I say always, there are times when I'll start a story not knowing what I'm trying to express, but by midway through, I know what it is, and then I can go back and fix the beginning.
Yeah, you find it.
Yeah. It's an organic process.
So a non-comedic piece. Do you have a personal fave that is?
I have many personal favorites. There's a new one. Do you want one? Are you asking me to do one?
Yes.
There's one that I've been working on that I haven't yet gotten a recording of. So, am I allowed to have the recording of this if it goes well?
Yes, you are. This can be a world premiere. Absolutely.
All right. Let me see if I can get this right, because it's very new and I haven't done it many, many times yet. If it doesn't work out, I'll do a different one for you that'll make you feel better about me. Recently, I was asked to do a show on Flag Day, and I was asked to do something that was flag related for the show. And I realized as I began to write that I am not at all comfortable with the American flag. I feel profound ambivalence around the American flag. It was a Friday, I was trying to write, and I didn't know where I was going with the story. So I did what I do on Fridays. I just listened to Jimi Hendrix and wept for my lost youth, and then masturbated in the shower, and then went to sleep. And as I was lying in bed, waiting for sleep to come, I tried to source out what it was that troubled me so much about the American flag as a symbol. When I was a child, my parents took me on peace marches. We were involved in the Vietnam War at the time, and I lived in upstate New York in a small town called Schuylerville, where everybody in town, with the exception of me, knew somebody or had a family member who was in Vietnam. It was a conservative place to live, but my parents would pack me and my sister into the car and drive off to Albany or nearby Saratoga Springs, where my dad taught at Skidmore, and we would go on peace marches and protest against the war. And I remember a protest in Saratoga Springs. We drove up early in the morning. My sister had made some cookies with icing on them in the shape of a dove. I remember that it was a dove because many, many people said, well, what is that? And she would have to explain to them that it was a dove and which direction the cookie should face. And they would pretend to see the dove and then eat the cookies. And as we marched from Cafe Lena up to Main Street and then across to the Skidmore College campus, people in the march were carrying big signs that said, hell no, we won't go, and not going to study war no more, and war is unhealthy for children and other living things. And lining the street on either side were counter-protesters. There were police keeping them from us and us from them, but the counter-protesters seemed very angry. They threw eggs at us, and they carried signs that said, my country right or wrong, and America love it or leave it, and they flew American flags. And it occurred to me that possibly patriotism was something that was felt by people who wanted everybody to feel exactly what they felt and had no room for those who felt otherwise. And I was only in second grade at the time, but the next day at school, I told my teacher that I was not comfortable saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I was not clear on all the nuance and all the subtle reasons that it was bothering me. I knew that the flag, though, was being used as a symbol by those people who disliked the idea of peace. And at some level, I knew that I did not feel comfortable pledging allegiance to a symbol that was being flown in support of the killing of people far, far away. And I was uncomfortable, frankly, with the part that said under God, because even in second grade, I was discovering that I was an atheist. I remain so thoroughly an atheist that when people tell me they believe in God, I don't believe them. And the teacher wasn't quite certain what to do, and she had conferences with the administrators and the other teachers, and it was decided that they would allow me to sit out the Pledge of Allegiance while everybody stood around me and put their hands over their hearts every morning. And it was also decided that all the other kids would be allowed to ostracize and brutalize me for doing so, because that's how freedom works. Shortly after 9/11 in 2001, I came out of Trader Joe. I had a bag of groceries, and there was just a light rain happening. We were gearing up to our second war in Iraq. And there was a man wandering from car to car in the parking lot, affixing to each one a little computer-printed American flag. It was 2001, so some cars still had aerials that he could fly them off of, and where they didn't, he would stick them on the windshield. it was raining and they were printed on an inkjet printer, so the colors were blurring into each other. And it seemed to me he was essentially distributing patriotic trash to people's vehicles. He approached my car. And I said, could you please not put that on my car? And he turned on me and said, what's the matter? You don't love your country? You don't love your flag? And I thought about it. And I said, well, sir, I have to tell you, I like living here. There's stuff about the standard of living that is very pleasant for me. But ultimately, I think patriotism is really just a hair's breadth short of nationalism. And ultimately, I don't feel comfortable saying that any group of people is better than any other group of people based on where they were born or where they live. And I don't think I have anything against the flag itself. In fact, I told the man, I remember when I was in high school, I had a friend who had rolling papers that looked like the American flag. And we sat out one night late at night on a field, and he rolled up joints and the American flag. And after he rolled each one and licked it and sealed it shut, he would tap it on the ground before we smoked it. And when we were on the third or fourth one, because we didn't get good grass in those days, I said, why do you keep tapping those on the ground? And he said, because his father was a Marine. And his father had told him that anybody who burned the American flag should be stoned to death as a traitor, but that if the American flag ever touched the ground, you had to burn it as a sign of respect. So if he tapped them on the ground, then smoking the joint was an act of patriotism, not an act of treachery. And I had said to that young man in high school, but we're still going to get stoned, right? And he didn't understand the joke at all. And I said to this man in the parking lot, at that time it occurred to me that a symbol and the way we treat it is all just a matter of protocol and has nothing to do with anything in reality. And while I am fond of the American flag, right now it is not being flown as a symbol of pride and of joy and of celebration. It is being flown as a symbol of vengeance and a call to violence, and I am not comfortable with it being flown in that capacity. And he said, this flag, sir, this flag is a symbol of peace and the freedoms you hold dear. And I should kick your ass just for talking about it that way. And it occurred to me that maybe the first casualty of war is not, in fact, the truth. Maybe the first casualty of war is a national sense of irony. And all of this drifted through my head as I was lying down to go to sleep, knowing that I had a Flag Day show coming up and knowing that I had to write a story for it. And I drifted off into an odd dream in which I was walking through a rain-slick parking lot, passing many cars looking for my own, unable to find my way. And Al Franken grabbed me by the elbow and steered me away from the parking lot and into a room where I sat with him and Eric Cantor, and we shared a joint as we watched election results come in on a big screen. And as the smoke rose up past our eyes, and we watched that big red and blue map of the United States, our eyes began to water with the smoke until all the edges blurred and all the colors ran together. And eventually the whole nation was united under a purple haze. It's not the funniest story in the world.
But it's a great piece, and you've got something to say.
But there's
a lovely arc to it.
Every image in it is clear. There are no wasted sentences. I realized too late into it that I left out a segment, and I just sort of put that one in where I needed it to be, and it worked fine. And it has an arc, and it has a clear perspective. And it says a lot of things that are not specifically enunciated. It enunciates some things more clearly than some of my stories do. I mean, the idea of patriotism as a gateway drug to nationalism is, although I've never phrased it quite that way before, and that may go into the story now, is, I think, very important and under-discussed.
Sure.
So that I sort of hit on the head and say, but I also deal at the end with the idea of borders being meaningless. But I don't say that. I imply that. And I don't say we have become too polarized a nation. It's not about being in favor of war or it's we have to be human beings who live together.
Yeah, which is something that I think is clearly missed.
And there are things that I don't say that I think are said by the story. And ultimately, here's when I know I've told a good story after a show. When people come up to me afterwards and say, that was great, it's lovely, it's stroking, it's fine. When they say, I love that story about, nice, I love to hear that. But when people come up to me after a show and go, I got a story about that, and start to tell me their own stories, and they're never well structured, and they're never particularly well thought out, and they don't always realize how vague the connection is between what I said and what they were thinking about. They think I told something that was just like something in their memories. And if that's happening, it means that I am actually getting into the subconscious. I'm actually getting their imaginations and memories working in tandem. And I'm doing just a little bit of work to counter the dumbifying of America, because that's basic critical thinking. When you're hearing a story and being taken by the images and applying it to your own life and finding the parallels and finding the connections for yourself, that's the basis of critical thinking, which we don't teach at all anymore in schools. When I was a kid, my parents realized that I was not getting enough critical thinking skills in school, so they immersed me in a full immersion home study course in hypercritical thinking.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
And I need I could use to impart that upon
in my family. We say, this too shall pass, when we hear good news.
Sorry, the dog coughed. I think that it's a phenomenal piece, and it. I love the bringing back, the ending with sort of the Purple Haze thing and going back to the Hendrix connection of that. Well, it, to me, is just that was such a sweet line. I mean, really.
This is the second story I've used that framework in. The Hendrix and the Purple Haze at the end. The dream changed, but the other one may have had the parking lot story in it as well. In any case, but a lot of my stories are, and this is something I learned from David Sedaris, a lot of my stories deal with callback. From the beginning of the story to the end of the story, and also the nature of memory. So in many of my stories, I deal with, this was happening and I remembered this happening. And then I'm back to this happening. So the outer parenthesis of the story tells the audience that I know what I'm doing. There's structure here. It looks conversational. It seems like I'm talking to a room full of people about this thing that I thought of. But in fact, I know what this is a structured piece. And then the nested flashbacks that I work with reflect that structure in sort of weird microcosmic ways. And I don't even know, saying it aloud isn't going to change the way it works. There's a neuro-linguistic trickery in it, because in the way that a hypnotist counts you down through the layers of consciousness in one way or another, I believe that by structuring further memory within what is already a memory, because every story is past tense, right? It's never, I'm doing this tomorrow and that's going to remind me of. It's always, I was doing this, and there was a blue sky and a beautiful waterfall, and I could feel the spray against my face, and I was reminded of. And now I've put the audience in a place, I've given them a certain amount of information, they're building an image in their mind, and then I take them deeper.
Right.
Now we're going back further, and I'm giving you a whole new set of images, and you have to set all that aside. That's now part of your memory. That's now not something you're thinking about. That's something you thought about a minute ago, and now you're into something deeper, and you're going farther away. And then I bring you back to that place. When you come back to that place with the waterfall, you know that place. Now, in order to finish the story, I have put you on familiar terrain. So the audience is constantly being comforted and almost seduced into taking a journey into their own imagination.
Right.
And it's not, I don't think about that as I'm writing each story. But when I realized what it was doing when I was telling them, I was, oh, that's a useful structure. That's effective. And I love when I can see the audience go away. If they're not,
is it something? Because I know oftentimes, depending on how the lights are, sometimes it's difficult to see the audience. But is there a place where you as you're doing stuff, you can begin to see just by whether it's how they're sitting or the looks on their faces that you begin to actually go, oh, I see that I see where they're going with this.
Yes, and I can hear it in their breath.
Really?
Yeah. There's a moment in one of my father's novels from the 70s in which a kid plays violin instead of doing his bar mitzvah speech. And he's doing a piece in 4 movements. And at first, the people are awed, but it goes on too long. And by the end, he's hearing the coughs and shuffles. And it's a fleeting image in this book of my father's. And I read it when I was a kid, and I went, oh, right. I know what he's talking about there. Mm-hmm. As long as there's no coughing and shuffling in the audience, I know I've got them. But at the Pasadena Civic, when I had 3,000 people, I could hear, in a way I never had before, the sound of the breath of the audience. But yeah, there's a particular kind of silence. One of the most difficult things for me when I started doing storytelling as opposed to stand-up is that I would hear the silence and I would feel like I needed to get a laugh.
Right.
Because in stand-up, silence is death.
Uh-huh.
Now I've reached the point at which when I'm doing stand-up, silence doesn't bug me. Silence means they're still with me. And do I want to take them deeper into that, or do I want to find a laugh for them?
Mm-hmm.
It's a choice. It's not a panic. And the laughs that I get, I still love getting a laugh, but I've learned to recognize the value of this audience is listening. They are with me in a place that has no laughter at all. There's also More Arts, Less Martial, which is coming out on the 1st of July as a $5 download.
Right. In fact, let's get to that. God, there's so much more I want to ask you about. We may have to do a part 2 because we're coming to the end of.
It's only an hour?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was a 2-hour show.
No.
Okay, let me say this.
Yes.
Rooftop Comedy is dropping a $5 special on July 1st. It's called More Arts, Less Martial. It's about my journey in the martial arts. And
Taekwondo, correct?
Yes. I'm a Taekwondo master. I have a 3rd Dan in Hapkido. I study Kikumdo, which is a Korean sword style as well. Mm-hmm. I close that with a guided meditation. And I ask the audience to close their eyes. And there are a couple of little clever NLP tricks that I do in that as well. But when I can see the last person who is resistant closing his or her eyes and allowing it to happen, I know I'm going to get a standing ovation. If one person has managed to fight me and they're not going to play along, it may not happen. But if that last person closes their eyes, I own the room.
That's awesome. So that's More Arts, Less Martial, and that's going to be dropped
July 1st.
July 1st, so next week.
Next Tuesday,
yeah.
rooftopcomedy.com. You can go there now and pre-order it. And I do not object at all if you pre-order it, because that's how you get those bestseller numbers on the first day of sales.
And if this was any indication to you whatsoever of what you would have in store, a $5 download, that's a bargain and a half. Buy 2, give 1 to a friend. Can you gift it?
I don't know. I'm going to say yes.
And if you can't find a way, they'll give you a link. You can do something.
It's an hour of stories, and it is a beautiful piece of which I am enormously proud.
I have no. In fact, and it was recorded up at the Throckmorton in Millvale.
No. This was recorded at the Fake Gallery here in town,
which is one of the first places I saw you.
It's a very small, very intimate venue, and I shot it sort of early Spalding Gray style, and I'm very, very pleased with it. No, up at the Throckmorton, I recorded the audio recording "Dylan Goes Electric" coming September 9th.
All right,
that's more than an hour probably in length, and that will be an audio download.
Very cool. And so they can find that there. Where else can people, Twitter, Facebook,
go to
website?
DylanBrody.com. Sign up for my newsletter. Find me at The Dylan Brody on Facebook for my fan page. Follow me at Dylan Brody, at Dylan Brody, at Twitter. Sorry, at Dylan Brody, at Twitter. And find me often in Starbucks ordering a coffee.
Yes, me too, as a matter of fact. There's 2 things. Number 1, thank you so much. And seriously, I think we need to figure out how to do a part 2. I mean,
thank you for having me. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, no, not only are you going to get a recording, I'm going to get one because I should have been taking notes. Just really, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your words and your wisdom. And your phrases as well. But I want to close on this because you and I have a mutual friend, and it's his birthday today. I don't know if he's listening or not. Chris Bono.
This is the song we sing when it's your birthday. This is the song we sing to avoid the cost of royalties. This is the song we sing when it's your birthday because those 2 old ladies are rich enough.
I didn't know that song. That's another reason to take notes. So, Chris Bono, you're out there. Happy birthday, brother. I love you. And everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Eat Crow. And thank you again, Dylan Brody, for making yourself as present and available and as awesome as you were. Really, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I look forward to doing it again, possibly as we're coming up on the next release.
That sounds awesome. Sounds perfect. Cool. Thank you all so much. Good night. Drive dangerously. Take risks.
The sky's dark, lights start to flutter. The clouds move in and shadows appear. A man dashes from behind a withering oak and disappears into the billows of mist. We shall say farewell for now, but the crow shall returneth, and bring back with him we know not. Now join me for some fine drinks at Sunset with the Wise Guys.